Okay, great. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us for the DataRescue Town Hall. My name's Dawn. I'm working with Edgy, and this call has been coming out of ongoing community building conversations that have been happening over the last few weeks, and we really wanted to have a town hall to accomplish a few goals. First, we wanted to review the accomplishments of all of the sort of data rescue events that have been happening around the country, so the nearly 30 events that have happened to date. We also wanted to just make sure we checked in to identify the common individual and motivations and themes across those events, and then the ongoing efforts that have happened since then. And we wanted to provide a beginning to strategize the next steps, building from this work. So like I had mentioned, I'll be facilitating this and also try and just make sure to keep us to time. In the agenda, we've had some suggested times on the side, so I might just be trying to bring the session back or kind of trying to make sure we move on to the next point. So sorry in advance. We have the agenda where we invite you all to add your notes. Also, as we go around through the call, there'll be times maybe where I prompt you, or if you have any thoughts, it'd be great to add them in the chat if you're not also able to speak. Just because we'll have those for a record after, and we'll kind of pull it together and do a little bit of synthesis, so we have this as like a strong record of everyone's thoughts on this call. And then for introductions, I actually wanted to hand it off both to someone from Data Refuge and someone from Edgy to speak a little bit about both organizations. And then we could go around and do a quick round of names as well. So Michelle, if you're able to speak a little bit about Edgy's background, and then sort of how that connects to data rescues, and then Margaret, do the same for Data Refuge.
Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm in a very echoey, noisy space. So my name is Michelle Murphy, and I'm one of the steering committee members at Edgy. I think lots of you here are connected to Edgy or have kind of bumped up on Edgy before. So Edgy is a network of volunteers, basically, many academics, legal people, scientists, now also some people who are ex-members of state agencies, so a kind of motley crew, and we do a variety of kinds of work. And there's kind of three working groups in Edgy. One is doing interviews, policy work, policy commentary, research on the transition of the agencies about environment and climate in the United States. A second group is doing website monitoring, and that has a kind of archiving component because it's kind of doing a web crawl of environment and climate websites and doing version tracking. And so it both kind of archives versions of these web pages and, you know, critically takes note of the changes that are being made in the current administration. And then a third aspect, which is this web archiving, preservation side of things, which Edgy's role has been, I think, largely a support role. So in thinking that through, many people here on this call are a part of that work, but I think, you know, Edgy kind of sees itself as hoping to support diverse community efforts, and has been kind of involved in kind of helping to cultivate tech communities that are kind of building some of the tools that are used in the data rescue events, and has organized a few of the data rescue events. And, you know, people in Edgy have been very excited about the question of, now that we have learned so much collectively around these different sites, what are some of the new questions? What are some of the further ways that Edgy members can take part in community efforts around thinking about archiving data, but also about the politics of data in this moment, where the government is increasingly hostile to some data, but wants to collect data on, let's say, immigrant crimes at the same time. So these are some of the questions we're thinking about, that critical side of thinking about the data, in addition to the kind of question of archiving. So that's some introduction to EDGI.
That was great, thank you. And then Margaret, if you could also provide an introduction to Data Refuge and your ongoing work.
Sure. So Data Refuge is a joint project between the Penn Program for Environmental Humanities and the Penn Libraries. We have, we started around the same time as EDGI, at the end of November, early December, kind of thinking about this issue of backing up data, this vulnerable climate and environmental data. But our goals, aside from trying to create, to work with these events to try and create research quality copies of this data, we also try to educate folks about the general vulnerability of foreign digital information, and advocate for that by telling stories to really connect the data to the communities that use the data, so that we can really tell that story, I guess, about, this data isn't just used by scientists, it's actually used by people, and it affects people on a day-to-day basis. So it's actually really important beyond just doing scientific research. And then, yeah, so we're thinking about, I don't know, I'm sorry. I'm just going to check the agenda and see if I'm supposed to continue talking about things or if that's enough of a recap of who we are. I think that's a good recap of who we are, basically.
Yeah, I mean, also, if I think that's probably good for now. Just we'll leave a bit of time. Given the size of the call, I think we can actually do a round of quick introductions if that works for everyone. And so if you could maybe just say your name and what data rescue, or if you've been involved in a data rescue event, that as well. And then that'll make its way into the doc. So I'll go through in the order I see people, if that's okay. And everyone who's already introduced themselves, I won't cover, just in the interest of time. So the first person I see is Toli. Me.
Might be muted, Tolly.
Okay, so maybe just in the interest of waiting until that tech thing is sorted out, I'll move on to the next person I see, which is John.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yay. John Payers from Virginia Tech. We haven't hosted a data archiving, data rescue event, but did do an event to inform people about the issues in data archiving, etc. Pleasure to be here.
Great, thanks for joining us. The next person I'm seeing is Kevin M.
Hey, Kevin McCulloch. I got involved after attending a data rescue event here in Washington, D.C. I'm a developer. I've been helping out with the Archivers app and some of our tooling.
Great, and then the next person I'm seeing is, I'm sorry, I might mispronounce this, S. Desai.
Hi, I'm Sangeeta Desai. I organize the Data Rescue Chapel Hill. Basically, I just saw Michigan's event, and as a student at the iSchool here, I just wanted to do the same thing. So that's how I got involved. And I'm now organizing a data rescue RTP for the Triangle area with the National Humanities Center, trying to expand to humanities or other agencies. So.
Great, thanks for joining us. And then the next person, I'm going to go back to, Matt, could you introduce yourself?
I am Matt. I work with EDGI. I've done a lot of coordinating of tech stuff, although Dawn's been doing most of that work lately. And this semester's almost over, so I'm looking forward to figuring out what we do next.
Great. The next person I'm seeing is Abby.
Hi, I am mainly working on the website tracking team and then also helping with some of the workflow stuff for events.
Great. The next person I'm seeing is Anka.
Hi. Sorry, I'm kind of slow. Hi. I organized Chicago's Data Rescue in March, and we're going to actually hold another one, excuse me, on Earth Day at Northwestern University.
Great, thanks. The next person I'm seeing is Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Haka. I'm a staff scientist at Caltech. I work mostly on software and standards. Attended the event in Philadelphia and then helped organize the event in at UCLA in January. So, and I'm also getting involved in the archivers software development aspects.
Great, thanks for joining us. The next person I'm seeing is Justin.
Hey, I'm Justin Schell. I'm from the University of Michigan Library in Ann Arbor. I attended the Philadelphia event and then organized the Ann Arbor event at the end of January, and have since then had helped organize the Minnesota event, and have had my hands in lots of different pies for this, from the app to larger data curation stuff, and I think some of that I'll talk about later. But that's me.
Great, and then the next person I'm seeing is Sarah.
Hi, my name's Sarah Wiley. I am on the steering committee for EDGI. I'm an assistant professor at Northeastern University, and I planned the recent Northeastern University event.
Great, and then the next person I'm seeing, I'm sorry I might mispronounce this, is Kaylee.
Hi, this is Kaylee Bohemier. I'm the Science Research Support Librarian for Astronomy, Geology, Geophysics, and Physics at Yale University, and I was on the organizing team for the one that we held in New Haven at Yale.
Great, thanks for joining us. And then I'm going to circle back to Toli. Could you introduce yourselves?
Sorry about, I wasn't ignoring you. The internet just cut out right exactly at that time. My name is Toli Renberg. I work with EDGI. I helped set up some of the primer systems and office codes that have been used early on, and also helped plan the Harvard event with Andrew and Maya.
Yep, and I'm Andrew Bergman. I went to the Philadelphia event, I guess, New York and San Francisco, and our own in Boston. I'm one of the AG steering committee members and work on website monitoring work as well, and some of the work that we do to monitor legislation and regulatory changes as well.
Sorry, got weird about the meeting there. Okay, awesome. So next we wanted to move into a bit of a recap of events and sort of celebration of the accomplishments we have. And I was just going to provide a couple high-level stats. So I had reached out to people who've been involved in stuff across different areas for kind of managing some of the tools that are used to kind of collect those. And they'll also be available to add some. Oh, did we miss anyone? Oh, sorry. So Kevin, I believe, already gave an intro, and Maya, I was just going to skip, but because of the note taking. But I'm sorry, you didn't introduce yourself. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, well, then you should introduce yourself too. Hi, I'm Maya. I work with EDGI, sort of on the website monitoring, also helping to organize and coordinate these events, and sort of a couple of other things. And I'm really excited that this town hall has come together today. So looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and then I had said that I'm Dawn, and I've been involved with EDGI, and so I've been at a couple events. I was at Ann Arbor and the DataRescue NYC, the first one. And okay, so moving on to some of the sort of recap of what we've accomplished so far through the roughly 30 events. We've added more than 55,000 unique seeds to the Internet Archive, some included in the end of term harvest, and then post end of term harvest, some of those going into a regular crawl, and those are being transferred over. Of the seeding work that's been done at events, we've actually identified a large portion that we've been calling uncrawlable, but that's not necessarily the right phrase. Or that phrase kind of, we have an internal meaning to that, but really we've identified pages that have difficult for the Internet Archives crawler to capture data sets or also collections of data that we're interested in doing additional work to ensure gets preserved. And there are some stats for that have been compiled. I'm just dropping a link in the chat. And then further, as part of the work at events, we've had a system for researching, harvesting, and then bagging and describing to ensure that we have a chain of custody for some of those difficult to crawl data sets. And there's currently 175 of those existing in the Data Refuge repository, covering 11 federal agencies. We have at this point around 1,500 currently in the pipeline at various stages that would be in addition to those data sets. And I wasn't sure if Toli, you had anything you wanted to maybe add about, because you've been involved in helping with the managing the back end of the seeding and the primers. So if there's additional stats maybe you want to provide. And I was expecting Brendan to be here, so I'm just going to ping him and see if he's around.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that overview, Dawn. Just a quick note, I think most of the stats on the first page are quite self-explanatory. There's a breakdown. At some point, we started actually sorting the data sets and the information on websites based on many files, visualization, database, and FTP. And there's a breakdown there. And then we also have breakdowns by agency. And lower down, we figured one way to track progress is actually not just by looking at the number of total seats, but because we put so much work into splitting up agencies by the subprimers, actually subprimer lines we feel are a good metric to use to understand kind of progress that we're making spanning these data sets. So on the second page, there's the agency coverage progress. At the moment, given all of the subprimers that have been written, we have something like 710 subprimer lines that we want to complete. So you could just think of them as sections of agency websites that we need to send people to screen through. And this is just a plot over time of how much progress we've made. And it's actually really awesome to see this thing growing, and hope it keeps growing and expands beyond just environmental, climate, and energy. And I think there's a lot of great directions that we can move in.
I just want to add also that, I think one metric that there's some reluctance to use is just the number of total seeds nominated, because different events nominated in different ways. Sometimes a lot of nominated seeds for a small set of web pages, and sometimes very few, but looking at the number of subprimer lines is maybe a good way of just understanding sort of the scale of the work that's been done as a function of what we'd like to achieve overall.
Great. That's a really good point. And maybe Justin just had a question that Toli you could speak to that was dropped in the chat about the number of sites in the app. And also Brendan, now that he's here. But so maybe Toli first, if you could speak to that.
The number, the number in the app, essentially the analysis here was just from the nomination Chrome extension. So it doesn't know anything about what's in the Archivers app. And this is something that I think part of the conversation will be to understand how to move those properly into the Archivers app. I think we should think a little bit about that, because we don't want to overwhelm the Archivers. There's something like 20,000 potential URLs, but maybe there's smart ways to condense that.
Great, awesome. And then I think the last point, and we have maybe time for one or two more questions before moving on. If anyone has one, to drop in the chat. Yeah, so Toli's answered. It's a deduplicated list. Awesome. So just a pause if there's any more questions around this.
I guess on the subject of deduplication, I just want to say it's worth noting that, and Brendan can speak more to this, it's deduplicated in the most trivial sense.
Yeah.
It's literally if two URLs are identical, which is very easy deduplication. It's not deduplicated in the sense that sometimes two websites will be pointing to the exact same data sets, but are different, different URLs. And sometimes they'll be pointing to similar data sets or subsets of one another. And so that gets more complicated, and that's not done. But the new app has some features to be able to take care of some of that.
Okay, so yeah, maybe if Brendan could just speak a little bit about some of the stuff going on the app side, and then let's move into event feedback from organizers and take it from there.
Great. Apologies for being late to the call, everybody. I totally gapped on the timing. Yeah, and so I'm assuming we're talking about app statistics. Is that in the right? Yeah, cool. So we have a whole bunch of as we were referring to earlier, we have we've moved about 1,800-ish URLs for the app. We're really sort of making good progress on that stuff. A lot of content seeded to Data Refuge. Don, pardon me if I'm repeating anything you've already mentioned. No? Okay, good. So we have that many, and then at least 180 data sets actually in Data Refuge now, like a very sizable number. What else is going on in the app? And we've mentioned the number of seeded URLs through the crawler, 175 data sets. Oh, shoot, I was off by 5.
I think maybe the question Michelle had, and sorry for like putting you on the spot here, was maybe just a little bit about I had sort of said that we have about 1,500 kind of in progress at various stages in the app, and that's been a part of the work focus. That's where the bagging and describing, in addition to some of that harvesting, is being managed. So maybe if you have anything more you want to say to that.
Totally, yeah. So we have a really good set moving through the app. We do have a good percentage of URLs that hit the app that are marked as actually crawlable. And so it's worth noting that of that 1,800 URLs that we've worked with number, at least 40% of those sort of are identified as crawlable, which is great because that means that we've had somebody from the technical community review it and make sure that it is in fact suitable to the IA. And yeah, what else? Speaking to this question in the chat, when we save the data, how is it retrieved by the scientists? Currently, we seed everything to Data Refuge with plans to do further integrations. But right now, if you go to datarefuge.org, it's there and available and in a great spot. It only hits Data Refuge once it's finished. So currently, we have a high number of URLs sitting sort of like at some point in the process, waiting for waiting to move to the next phase. And we have that actually on the homepage of archivers.space. You can actually see the live count of where everything is at any given moment. Hopefully that helps as a good starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. As part of so through those events, we had a couple of organizers that we asked to speak in just to sort of help move into feedback, and then we wanted to have a broader conversation with everyone here who's been involved. Justin, if you're able to maybe just give us a bit of a kickoff and describe what's happened at your event. So maybe briefly when, where, who, kind of what moment stood out to you the most, and if there's anything that you learned from other event organizers, it would be awesome to share.
Sure. So from, I think it was similar to Sangeeta, who said like, oh, I saw this event happen, then I wanted to do one. I saw the Washington Post article and that talked about the Toronto event. I was like, okay, we're going to do one. I have no idea how. And at the same time, one of the directors in our library said, we need to do something about this because we're Michigan, we need to do it big. And so that's been sort of parallel tracks going on with the larger sort of data curation community and building repositories and things like that. But for me, it was running this 2-day event in the design lab that I run at the University of Michigan Library. And so not knowing how to run an event like this, I headed out to Philly to learn that and ended up helping out with a bunch of the initial workflow sort of establishment and then use that model for the Ann Arbor event. We were still on a spreadsheet back then, the grand old days of January, with that ever fun spreadsheet. But U events now have it so much easier. But we pulled in about 300 people, I can't remember, over the 2 days on Friday and Saturday. One data set is still downloading from that event. It's an EPA data set that is a high priority one, and this is why it helps to have your university sysadmins be your friends on the project. And so from there, we've hosted or worked with a couple of civic tech nights. We are also working to do an event in Detroit in a couple weeks, tentatively scheduled for April 15th, a Saturday. But also going back to that first theme of Michigan, Michigan is the initial home of HathiTrust, the global or the multi-billion page text repository. and also one of the homes of DPIN, the Digital Preservation Network, and also has one of the sort of originators of the data curation community, Jake Carlson, there. And so we've been working through these networks and building out more connections to people, both within data repository land as well as within sort of federal government and federal data centers, who could help us identify what data is vulnerable, and the different kinds of ways that they would judge vulnerability versus how we would judge vulnerability. So, for example, we ended up downloading about 3 terabytes of buoy data during the Ann Arbor event. And after talking to someone in the Research Data Alliance, who is the community development person for them, said, "Oh yeah, that data is like in 15 different places. That's pretty good because lots of people use that." Now, the larger question is it accessible in those 15 different places? Is it preserved, et cetera? So, and that transitions to the longer term question of what kinds of infrastructure do we want to build or build or adapt to these longer term preservation things. At the same time, we were working with our faculty here to figure out what data sets they needed, as well as working with some community projects to incorporate things like Zooniverse crowdsourcing element to some metadata transcription. And I think that's where a lot of my focus is within citizen science, to either work with sort of developing community tasks, like some community site mapping that we did at the Minnesota event, looking at the crowdsourcing of perhaps the page freezer website monitoring work that could be done as part of events, as well as, like I mentioned, the Zooniverse project that could be around metadata transcription of the 2 million or so PDFs that have been harvested by the end of term crawls over the last 8 years. So yeah, lots of work, lots of things happening, and lots of directions to go forward. And so yeah, that's what I've got to say about that so far. Is there anything else that I'm missing, Dawn?
I think that's great for now. And what we were hoping is to have a couple, like you speak, one more event organizer, and then have a bit of an open conversation. Margaret, if you have a question, is it something that could be typed in the chat for now, or and then brought up later, or is it a?
I just want to give a shout out to Justin, because without him and the work of Delphine and Rachel at Temple University, we would be so screwed. But we love them with all of our hearts, and we're so grateful for them.
Right back at you, Margaret, and everyone else.
Awesome. Yeah, so I feel like I probably should have said this, sorry. But if there are questions come up or themes that you notice in something that someone's saying, it'd be great to drop it in the chat so we can sort of revisit that later and kind of bring that forward. The next person, Patricia, I think you had said you would speak a little bit about your event. So again, sort of briefly describe when, where, who, also a moment that stood out to you the most, and maybe if you learned anything from other DataRescue event organizers.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So I actually have a spreadsheet, or sorry, a presentation that I don't know how to share using this format, but I can just speak to that real.
It's actually down on the bottom. So there's a green button that says share screen. I think you might be able to see.
I see it now. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, can you guys see my screen now? Okay, great. So I just want to talk a bit about why I decided to do this, and I think that in this kind of current climate, it's really important that we preserve this knowledge. And the second step is to empower people, by showing them how to use it for themselves. And I can talk a little bit about that later. So just a few things. So there's the learnings that we took from our event in March. There's some workflow stuff that I actually added to, I created some checklists and templates and stuff to help me personally, because this was my first time hosting this event. I knew nothing about Data Refuge and doing all this stuff. So this helped me parse through all the data and kind of make it make sense to me, and hopefully helped the people who attended my event, and maybe some opportunities for later. So the results were, there's 35 people signed up, but 24 people showed up. We didn't get as much done as I had hoped. We didn't harvest as much data, but it was more like for me and for others there, especially in our area, there weren't, at least the people that attended, they were like, this is my first time, I want to do this. So a lot of it was just like, how do we do this thing? And, after that, people were like, when's the next one? We like doing this. So hopefully we'll get more done in the next event. I actually have also an event results spreadsheet that I can share with you all. This is like basically I had everybody, because I wanted to make sure that like everyone felt like they did something, or at least like I was able to relay back like how much we got work done. They kind of took notes on what they did. So that's that. It was mostly positive feedback from volunteers, and again they want to do it again, which is great. So as an organizer, while I was organizing the event, it was a really comprehensive workflow, but it was a little bit difficult to parse. I mean, for me as a new person coming in, it was like different sources, reading from different places, which is fine. It was just putting that all together might be a little bit challenging for some. It would have been nice if there was a little bit more clarity to go to like know a specific person to ask for some help. There's just all these other things. So to help me and the volunteers, I felt like doing this event, it would take up a lot of time just setting up. So I put together this really simple document to just an attempt to like just condense the workflow into a very easy, simple checklist format. So I sent this out to people before the event, so I had them like just do all of these things before so we could get started right away, because I figured that like there was going to be a lot of stuff that they had to do, and I wanted them to actually do work while they were there. Some people printed this out, and this helped them kind of like figure out what we're doing. So it was just a general checklist for, like what's common to everybody. And then for each role, there's like mini checklists that they would have to do, like pre-install, pre-read, and all that stuff. So I think like organizing that helped some folks understand what they need to do. And then even like just logistic stuff.
Just in the interest of time, is there a couple maybe like key moments that stood out around this? Like, I think this stuff is super awesome.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we integrate this feedback. But are there kind of like themes maybe across sort of what you noticed while organizing that we could speak at a high level here, and then maybe dig into specifics later?
Yeah, sure. So I think that people just weren't sure what to expect throughout their day. I mean, overall, it was just like, well, we're going to do something, but we don't know exactly what that looks like. So that was like maybe a little bit more clarity, even though like we had a preset agenda. It was just still kind of like the roles were still kind of unclear, the paths were still kind of unclear, and maybe it was my fault for not understanding it at that time fully. So it was just that, like, just a little bit more clarity on what they were doing, and also like knowing how much they really made a difference. So like this was actually like, I hope that it validated a little bit of what they did, but like because they did a lot of setting up for the most, for the half of the day, I think they have felt that like, I feel like I didn't do as much. So just like being able to, know what they're getting into, and like maybe an expectation of like how much I would be doing, and having that result at the end helps. So yeah.
That's awesome. And if you are able to share the link to your slides in the chat, that would be amazing just for other event organizers. We kind of wanted to open it up now too, because we have a bunch of organizers. Oh, sure.
Sorry. I'm also going to share out, like, there's a bunch of these templates and stuff too that are like totally available to anyone to use if you want. So I'll share that out as well.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, so we were kind of hoping now, like with those two in mind, for other event organizers to maybe speak briefly to one of those or all of those questions, but also in particular, maybe like if they see themes in common, it would be great to say, and you can either mention it in the chat, and it's great that we're sort of taking advantage of that, but also the channel is open now. I'm gonna stop sharing your screen. I think I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe you need to actually, Patricia. I'm not sure. No, I don't think I can. Sorry. Okay, great. So if anyone else has something they would like to add in from their experience, or if they're noticing a theme across those, I dropped a couple of my themes in the chat, and I see a few more that are have been mentioned. Yeah, so I'm seeing also this issue about sort of like thinking about how to onboard people, some of that templating stuff. I think it was cool that both of you had mentioned that you saw an article and you kind of like, or like you saw this happening and you're like, how do I get to do this where I am?
May I share something?
Yeah.
I agree with everything she just said. Because I think we spent so much time just trying to figure out the workflow and everything like that, but just trying to get things started. Some of the other issues we had were, I think I tried to send in registration, I tried to send a survey out explaining the roles, and I think that I need to work harder on that, and if anyone has better ways of explaining this, because I think a lot of people actually in the high school themselves kind of started coming to me like, I don't know what to sign up for, I don't understand the role, and so people weren't registering because they felt intimidated by the whole process. And so I had to like start to roll it back and say, if you can surf the web, there's something you can do. If you can write a story, there's something you can do. So I felt like that was something that we're going to work more on for this, for our next data rescue.
Yeah, I think that's the same exact thing here. Like, there's a lot of non-technical people that want to contribute, and they really can. You know, they can do survey work. You know, so like just making that less intimidating, like you said, is also one of our goals for our next data rescue.
One thing, and this is Justin, one thing that we did in the sort of the difference between the the Michigan and the Minnesota event, I staffed an orientation table that was the second stop after someone registered. And for each, you know, whether it was a small group or a single person, basically walked through the different roles and gave, you know, the level of sort of technical skills, whether that was developer skills or librarian metadata skills or research skills or things like that. And so people could, and then we had them sort of, those were all color coded, and we had those colors on the tables. We also had guides stationed at each one that could get people up and running, you know, right away. But we also made very clear that said, if you're not comfortable with this role, like you can drop into a different role very easily. The other thing that we tried to do, partially because at that time we were almost out of primers. I think we actually finished the last one at that time. Is we just had a more general archiving track that used the Internet Archive's Chrome extension. So we could look at, we were doing some research with the Internet Archive API to see what things weren't super well covered. And so we could say, okay, Department of Forestry or whatever we chose for that day, and had people go through and sort of systematically do that as a first step towards that community site mapping goal. So an even sort of less technical skill in terms of not having to identify crawlable versus uncrawlable content. But I think that orientation table really helped get people comfortable with the roles and what they meant, and also how they fit into the larger sort of workflow.
I'm glad you mentioned the color coding, because we're trying to do that for the next one. And also what we're trying to do this time is we've actually added the host training for our next data rescue, because I think people really want to do more of these stuff, this kind of thing with their organization, but they don't know how to get started. So I'll be walking folks through that as well.
Hi, this is Kaylee. So We actually, when we were doing things, on the Eventbrite form, we had a checkbox list where we had, okay, so you have programming skills, you have back-end web skills, you have all of these skills, so we could get people thinking about it. And then we actually sort of broke things down into, okay, so as a seeder, sorry, that's my cat in the background. So as a seeder or sorter, you know, you need these types of skills. As, you know, somebody who's working in the app, here's the range of skills that you might need for all of this stuff. And that sort of worked. Of course, the seeders and sorters generally felt a bit less confident. I said a little bit of that in the chat, but we were trying pretty hard to make sure that it was good. And we also, at the beginning of the event, ran through the entire workflow from beginning to end of what happened, so that the people who were there in the beginning got oriented to things. And then as stuff happened throughout the day, people were able to come and talk to us if they had questions.
So maybe even just one theme I'm seeing on this call itself is there's like so much like sharing across events, like what worked, what didn't. That seems like it's pretty helpful for event organizers. I'm wondering too, just thinking about some of this stuff, it'd be great if people could speak a little bit to as well, like, and maybe sharing this in the chat, like what motivated them to attend or host a data rescue. I think that would be really great to kind of uncover a little bit more of. And also, I think one of the other things, or we've seen a little bit of this, of like maybe a thing that you wish you had known at the outset of planning, because I think it'd be great to sort of understand if there's a way that we could bring that stuff to the 1 year at the beginning of planning an event. And if anyone, like, you don't have to share it in the chat, you can also just speak up. We have time.
There was one onboarding, like it was, I think it was checkers and baggers. It was something with admin, like giving admin access to checkers, baggers, and describers, I think. We were kind of like spinning our wheels trying to figure out why they couldn't, you know, log in. And it was because, like, as an admin, I had to go to Archiver's app and, you know, make sure that I select the person's username and like assign to them, okay, you're a checker, you're a bagger, and all that stuff. And we didn't, I didn't know that. I thought I read the workflow like thoroughly. I mean, I went over that once, so I may have still missed it, but it was like one of the things that like we learned that day after finally getting help from Justin or it was either Justin or Brendan that helped us out with that. And then there was also, you know, that and logging into datarefuge.org, creating that account and all that stuff. It was just like, I don't know, like you know, like we all missed it. So it would have been nice to have figured that out in the beginning, and yeah.
This is Sarah. I put together the Northeastern event. I ran into one interesting problem. I was very interested in finishing off the harvesting and bagging for data from EPA that's been added to the Archivers app. And Brendan really helped by letting us know where things were in the pipeline. But then the people from the Boston area who have been really leading the archiving work here were sort of hesitant to work on archiving that stuff because they were focused on developing the Archivers 2.0 app. So I just ran into this problem of like, well, I really want to get this stuff bagged. But from a technical perspective, there was sort of a feeling of, well, we need to have a different process to bag before we can do that. So I guess that's one of the things that I'm wondering about is really how do we make sure things that are in the pipeline are really making it to getting bagged, and how do we how coherent is that process? And it was really hard for me to know at all from the outside, you know, what to say or advise. So we ended up kind of having to drop that aspect.
Yeah, I think bagging is a particular skill, and so it has often been an issue for people who haven't, you know, like on purpose enrolled that skill already in the event. So I think Brendan, though, can speak to the prospects for just moving things around with Archivers too.
can I say something within that before you jump to that, Brendan? This is Justin. So with the bagging, I think one thing that has gotten, I think, me caught up in sort of slowing this process down is the emphasis of this idea of, would this make sense to a scientist as a criteria for the bagging stage, and that sort of checking bagging stage, which is pretty hard to do, in my opinion, at a single event, or if you don't have a specific kind of scientist or researcher or things like that. So, but if your role as a bagger is to validate the data that that was harvested, and you can go and use the Python library or the Digital Conservancy packaging tool, and can validate that this will be the same 6 months from now if someone downloads it, and not having to worry about the sort of making sense to a scientist thing, but that sets a really high bar, in my opinion, to declare this as sort of valid, and so I think that's where some of the bottleneck was. So if we can say that we've got this amount of data from this website, we are confident in what we received, let's bag that, make that available, while also knowing that there are folks working on sort of behind the scenes to about whether these are more quote unquote authoritative copies of this data, and so embracing as much as we can the important but also not limited nature of this, but like we can't offer the same assurances in the same way that a government agency who has this data set could, because we are not the federal government, and so being able to but still work through and bag that data and get it into CCAN, I think is still the big push for me.
Thanks for that feedback, you two.
Yeah, just in the interest of time, I think Brendan maybe could speak to some of the things about how some of this technical stuff could change in the future, maybe a little bit later. But I also wanted to bring in some of the event feedback that we've been receiving at the 2 community building calls we've had so far from organizers who weren't able to be here today. And so I kind of made a mess of Post-its notes in front of me. I'm gonna try and bring these up or make sure I grab them. But one of the big themes that came up, which I think I heard again today, was something about each event is going to do something slightly different, and so maybe understanding that we can work with that and figuring out a way for them to customize it. Another thing that's closely tied to that is it seems like events really spoke to the importance of anchoring it to local interests and skills, and I heard that a little bit today about trying to provide a way for people to see how they could attend it, because maybe there's something around the language or identifying it as being very technical when it doesn't have to be. Seems like there's a big range of communities who are working at these events or who maybe get excited about this, and so this could be a way that they bridge across. I've heard a little bit today, but this came up in our last call in particular, that there's a lot of people who want to understand how the work they're doing at events fits in better with longer term goals around this data and around sort of what this community could be. And one thing I've heard a lot in all the feedback that I've gone through and then also in those calls was there's been a lot of enthusiasm from attendees. So when's the next one going to be? Or people who couldn't attend emailing and saying, oh, I missed this. What can I do now to help? And I can say from my personal experience on the Slacks that we're getting a lot of people joining, saying, there was an event in my town. I missed it. I saw it. I'm here now. What can I do? And so those are kind of just some of the themes that other people have been bringing up, but I don't know if people see any connections there or something that they also want to speak to just on a kind of on that note. And if not, I was gonna sort of make us start to move a little bit more to thinking about some of the longer term future stuff. But if anyone has a thought on sort of current themes, or I think we also mentioned a bunch of pain points or ways that, needs that we need to address. I mean, I think some of those parting ones too in the chat would be really helpful to have.
I think I'd like to just say one more thing about that, and that's just like visibility of the nominated URLs and things like that. That was one of the things that I heard at my event too. It's like there weren't as many seeders, and there were like mostly harvesters, which was great, but the seeders and also even some describers who had like not enough to do, they were not sure which websites they should be checking. So it would just like, they were asking me like, is there a place where we know we can start looking? And we can just say that, hey, this is climate related, so we're focusing on EPA, NOAA, and all that stuff. But which exact URLs or pages or parts of the site should we be looking at? So just like that visibility would be great. I mean, we can definitely, if we have more, of course, if we have more resources, we could use archivers to kind of like recreate the site map of a specific agency website, and then just like have a very simple thing where it's a list of URLs and it tells you when the last time this particular URL was nominated, when it was last saved, so that just at least like we know we have some sort of starting point.
Yeah, no, that's a great point for sure. I'm noticing some more stuff out of chat, which is awesome. So we're kind of keeping right to our schedule, which is also great. I'm a little surprised. And I'm wondering if maybe we just want to give like a couple moments if people want to just like go grab a drink or something. I think some people said they might have had to leave around now, before we sort of move in a little bit more into talking about like sort of local community efforts, and thinking about people who've sort of identified that they might want to host another event in their community, and then thinking about proposals for the future. So yeah, like we'll just take a 1 to 2 minute pause here, or let's say more, we'll say 3 minutes. And so we'll start up again. So I'm gonna pause the recording as well. And if people need to leave, this is the time you can also do so, but I mean, feel free to leave as needed. Okay, so we're back from our break, and this is kind of in the second half of the town hall. We were hoping to really dig in a little bit more to the local community efforts, and I think just try and connect a little bit and understand some of the motivations for maybe what people are looking to do going forward, and then speak to some current and emerging opportunities, and then sort of understand what additional work maybe we want to what proposals we maybe want to put forward for additional work. So we kind of just covered a bit of event feedback, and I guess the first question, which would be really good to hear from event organizers, is maybe like, are they planning on hosting another event in their community? And this could be a one to maybe just drop in the chat just to get a sense on numbers, and or if there has already been more than one event, maybe you could just write that in too. And then kind of while people are adding that, I think the question that I would love to put to you all as well is what are the opportunities you see, and then also barriers for this ongoing action. So in thinking about hosting another event, yeah, like are there any opportunities you're seeing or that you're kind of going to take advantage of, or have you identified some barriers about sort of like an ongoing form of action?
I think one of the main barriers for, at least that I've found, is people are interested, but they don't know how to start. There were at least a couple of groups went to my DataRescue just to learn about the DataRescue so that they can do that for, in their area. So it was just like, so that's why we're doing the hosting segment of that, so we can get more people to learn about the process and then just like do it on their own. There's actually like for this time around, there's 3 of us in the Chicago area that's trying to do this. So it's like, and they kind of like are looking at me to like, hey, can you do this? I'm like, no, I can't do everything. So hopefully they'll get more comfortable, and we'll get more and more people and more, even further west and further south and further north to go do that would be really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm wondering if anyone else maybe has an example or of like a opportunity they're seeing about an upcoming event, if people have already organized one.
So this is Justin. With the Detroit event, not being from Detroit myself, and also knowing the University of Michigan's more than somewhat checkered past and relationship to Detroit, I'm trying to be very careful and very community partnership oriented to doing this event, and so reaching out to a lot of different groups who have been working on things, especially with housing data in Detroit. And so thinking of this both as an opportunity to preserve this kind of data, but also having this function as sort of a gathering for people who have this expertise, and to start, developing the larger sort of community infrastructure that may or may not be there in Detroit. I think that's part of like figuring out what this event is for, as well as the seeding and the harvesting, which I think is a little bit easier to run as part of events, but also working with different libraries in the area to do the bagging, the metadata pieces. So being able to both bring together different groups that are already working on the areas and sort of local expertise, but also trying out some different community tasks, like I mentioned before, whether that's metadata transcription or other forms of crowdsourcing, is something I really like to do in upcoming events.
Awesome. I'm wondering if like maybe speaking to that a little bit about partnerships, which I think is yeah, what Brendan said, which is really cool. I mean, thinking about too, like, it seems like there's a spread across like the types of activities which might align with sort of what we've been doing so far. I'm wondering if other people kind of have had that experience where they're seeing like parallel efforts that they want to sync up with. I can speak to one that kind of was brought up to me. I know some of the people in Boston are working with the Data for Democracy, which does a lot of parallel work, but is not necessarily quite as focused around this sort of like preservation of federal data sets, but is really about like working with public data. So that kind of came up as another parallel effort.
So we're, I'm hooking up with the National Humanities Center to, I've kind of written about this on the chat already, but a little bit, but we're trying, they want to obviously expand to do more, like more agencies that are a little bit more humanities centered. So we will still do environmental data, but we're actually we're going to send out surveys really soon to all of the, so I'm in the research triangle, which is Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. So we have a lot of universities here, and we also have a lot of industry here, tech industry, and research and stuff. So we have great, community here. And so we're trying to reach out to the National Humanities Centers is very connected to all the different like social science and that type of thing. So we're sending out a survey based off of the survey you had to all of them to kind of get them involved, to say what data sets matter to them. And then the kind of a little bit of a hook is, hey, do you want your data to be rescued? Join us for our primer writing event, which we're trying to schedule Endangered Data Week. So hopefully they come and then they're involved in the primer writing, and hopefully they'll come for the checking, that kind of thing, to get the social scientists in there. So that's kind of like what we've been trying to organize. And then we haven't finalized the dates, but it's going to be in June for this larger humanities based data rescue, RTP as we'll call it. And then we're hoping that with some of the folks coming in there, that we'll kind of train new people in creating smaller ones so that it can continue in Duke. And so there's Duke here, and CSU, UNC, and other institutions can then start doing their own. I mean, another question I kind of had was just wondering how people have organized like remote things. because there's a lot of people who want to come in, especially around here, who are like, I can do this remotely, but I don't really want to come in for this. And so just knowing what modules are there for creating remote things. And just one last thing I wanted to say about a roadblock is one of the problems I've had, being that we're a state institution, because I'm from UNC, some of the librarians were working, but they would do it like on their own time. They couldn't volunteer library staff time for fear of actually being fired for this being viewed as a political. And as you know, North Carolina has some issues right now, but they're worried about being fired for anything being interpreted as a political, doing anything political during work hours. So that's all I want to say.
Those are great. I saw that Toli wanted to add something that kind of connected to your first point in terms of like kind of almost like partnerships or people to connect to. So let's stay on that theme for a second, and then maybe we can revisit the second point you raised. So Toli, maybe do you want to speak for a bit about your question or
Sure.
opportunity?
Yeah, and so Andrew and I actually a couple weeks ago now were down in DC for Sunshine Week, which is a week to celebrate, actually across the country, but particularly in DC, week to celebrate open government. A lot of open government groups were there discussing sort of what should be done during this transition and under the new administration. We were there and made a lot of connections preliminarily. Andrew and I, for those of you that don't know, are moving to DC for a little while to kind of explore those connections more, both across EDGI, but also data archiving. So very briefly, I think we'd be very happy to serve as a feedback channel with all those groups, in particular, like Sunlight Foundation, Project on Government Oversight. There are smaller groups like Open the Government. A lot of them are interested in the data archiving work and thinking about how to make that more visible and make that more well known. One thing that we were surprised, but maybe we shouldn't have been surprised, is that a lot of people have actually heard of the DataRescue events. And people are like, oh, that's you guys, great. And so everyone's like really positive about it and wants to know where it's going. And so we even spoke with folks at the National Archives, and I think those are really good connections to have, thinking about sort of direct channels from agencies to the Archivers app and things like that. Can we even like circumvent some of these events and just get a pipeline of data going? And happy to be kind of a voice over there and try to understand how to do that in the best possible way. Did I miss something, Andrew? You want to add to that?
Yeah, just on the pipeline, I mean, a lot of these organizations very specifically have actually a web page or their own internal thing that says like, here's what's come down. And to be clear, the only thing that really has come down is this one animal welfare data set, although there's a lot of sort of people that are, there's some vague misinformation about what's been coming down. But I think what's really important and what a lot of people express interest in is the work of DataRescue and Data Refuge and EDGI becoming a very clear resource and us really being able to directly inform them. So they weren't looking at us at all as a competitor, but as someone that they could really use as a resource, which is exactly how we present ourselves. So it would be useful, whether it's through an API or just through, even to start with like a spreadsheet, to have something that is directly piping into their website so that they don't just have an ad hoc sort of aggregation, but they really can systematically know what's changing.
Yeah. No, and just one more thing, that there are actually a lot of people that have helped build the open data platforms under Obama, and they have thought a lot about these problems already. Data.gov is one instance of that, but there's a lot of other efforts, and so I think we have a lot to learn from them.
Okay, so like that seems like a big area is thinking about partnerships. In many senses, I think there's been a lot of conversation about the remote stuff, and I think maybe we want to also check in with this verbally, because that seems like an important point. It seems like sort of simultaneously there are some barriers there, but also opportunities. I'm wondering if maybe Justin or Margaret wants to speak a little bit to like the current state of remote stuff, because I feel like both of you kind of been chiming in, kind of have the best understanding of that. Would that be okay? And then we could sort of connect that to opportunities that people have identified around it.
Sure. So as I think I typed in here, and as Margaret mentioned, because of the emphasis on provenance and the sort of reproducibility of this and the transparency of this, we really need people to understand the importance of that within the workflow before we sort of let them have at it to the workflow. I think part of this is also a security measure, that we don't want to open this up to too wide of an audience that we don't know, for fear of losing things, et cetera, or sabotage. So I can see, I can see, two ways to do this. One would be or it could be simultaneously. One would be to do sort of a module or webinar that we hosted on a regular basis, maybe weekly, that would identify this, but then also would have a sort of checking component to that person's work, to make sure that they've followed. We have our standards are very clear in what kinds of things need to be followed with it, and we have people who go through and check that with the particular data. There's also the thing that was brought up earlier about having the verified, unverified section of the CCAN data refuge instance, where if this was done by someone who is not part of an event or hasn't met this criteria, this is a sort of this hasn't been checked by an official person. And there was one more that I was going to say. Building this into the instructions for the app itself. Having the we need to see X, Y, or Z things, and having that either sort of structured like it is, sort of like it is now, but even more so where they're checking boxes that it's this kind of format. This is going to be this is going to be in this kind of file formats. This is going to be this is the kind of information we need you to say in sort of the notes from harvesting field or the bagging notes field, and giving more structure to those fields rather than just leaving it up to that person who's doing it at that moment and hopefully having some guidance, but really structuring that without hopefully over structuring it. Margaret, was there things you wanted to add?
I would just say, so right now, we get a lot of people who email us and want to help remotely. And what we've been doing, what we have now is, because the workflow does say use this form if you want to describe or bag to get the permissions. And so people have been filling that out, and if they're at an event, then we really just do it because the admin at the event can give them those privileges. But we still want them to fill out the form because we want to know who they are. We want to know their names for that whole chain of custody, knowing who touched this kind of thing. And then people who have gone to events and done the process and seen the whole workflow and understand it, we've been letting them continue to do that work outside of the event that they attended. And then people who want to harvest or research who have reached out, we'd let them do that because that's a less critical piece of the validation part.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like both of you surfaced and what was brought up in the chat was that there are a lot of, it kind of connects to maybe some of the needs we have in the current workflow, but there's also some opportunities, and it kind of goes back to some of the stuff that Justin talked about thinking about what citizen science approaches could be used around here. Just being mindful a bit of time, and so I'm seeing sort of on the needs front, we have some stuff we could think about for this, but there's also some opportunities that come about in person and remote, sort of both being approaches we could support. I'm wondering if people maybe sort of from everything they've heard so far are able to sort of do people maybe want to speak a little bit, because I think it'd be great to sort of start to think a little bit about the future in terms of what would it mean to succeed at this effort. So what to us would look like success, what would inspire you to be more involved with the community, sort of what are you hoping to gain or contribute as part of your work on this, and then help that kind of anchor, sort of help us understand which opportunities we should be focusing a little more on, and or which needs are more critical to address immediately. And again, you can add into the chat or maybe chime in.
So if I can say something that's been on my mind a little bit, related, not exactly specifically to not exactly what you just asked for, but I think in the right direction, which is that a lot of this work has been done by volunteers, and it's hard to sustain that over long term. And so one thing to think about is how to support people better, long term funding, or paid positions, or something that the community needs to keep this going, because I know some people are already burnt out, have said that they're feeling burnt out. And I can't believe that some of the ones among you who I know are still like ridiculously high energy. I don't know how you've maintained that level of energy over the last several months. But I think it's a problem it seems to be unsolved at the moment. So that's something to think about, is how to keep this going long term, and what are the mechanisms to support and fund people. Basically, because I'm blanking out on the right words for that, but I think you understand my point.
Yeah, no, it's a great, I think it's a great point. And I would say I also see sort of a big need is to try and understand what sustaining this looks like, but also making sure that it's supporting, what it's supporting people feeling like they're gaining and contributing to something, and sort of understanding what that shared something looks like. And so as we move forward, trying to make sure that we're building towards like shared priorities and shared vision. John, do you want to say something?
I did. How'd you know? That's pretty awesome. I think another part of this, and it kind of goes to what Mike was just saying about this being a volunteer effort, the value proposition for all this hard work. So, data archiving is hard. It takes a lot of time and effort. And what we all want to know is that data is going to be used by somebody in the future. It's going to be, this is important work, and we're preserving this data because it's going to be useful. And, right now, I think for this effort, it's hard to know, right? We're certainly all very scared that the data is going to go away, and we're going to be really happy that we have our copies of it. But it hasn't happened. In a couple instances, my understanding is a couple of instances this has happened, but it hasn't happened wholesale. And so understanding what the most vulnerable data sets are, like Justin mentioned that this buoy data had 15 copies somewhere, and some other data sets maybe that have been focused on, maybe there are no copies, and thank God we got a copy of that some backed up somewhere, and other ones maybe that's not the case. So really understanding what the value is going to be. I think it's an important part for sustaining thing going long term. And yes, the budget is certainly a big concern. I didn't read the rest of what you said, Justin, but that's certainly a big concern. Not for me.
I think that's actually a really significant point that you raised, John. And I've been thinking that way too a little bit. Like long term, what do we want to accomplish? And one of the things I sometimes say in my stupid media appearances is that this came to us as a crisis, but it also provides us with an opportunity to rethink how we organize the kind of curation of scientific data as a society over the long term. So, and I think Brandon really believes that, and is thinking about what the technical infrastructure is that we can replace the kinds of data cultivation or data curation infrastructure that we have now. And I would like to think that what we get out of these events is to some extent kind of a movement to transform the sustainability of scientific data.
Yeah, I piggyback on that. I think that if this movement has, I think it is a movement, but that's me. And I think that changing the relationship that people have with data is a really important aspect of this. Like, I think that we think of data as like something that smart people have in a corner, and it's not something that regular humans touch, whatever that means. And I think that that's a part of a cultural shift that I think we should be trying to think about motivating. And one of the best, something that I have seen at every data rescue event I've had the pleasure of attending, is people interacting with information that they never touched or had any chance to sort of see or knew existed. Like I did not know about weather buoys in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, or what they did, or what volatile organic compounds were, or any of these things. And I learned, I've learned a bunch of stuff just as part of these events. And I think that that's the beauty and the joy of like a lot of people coming together and enjoying each other's company and really participating in cultural shifts of our attitudes towards this information. And so I couldn't agree more about the notion of like upping the way that we interact with this data, and really sort of knowing that use propagates the existence of this stuff. And so if we approach it from that aspect, I think as Matt said, I'm deeply excited about that part of this process. And I think that the more of it we do, the better.
Yeah, one thing that's always really stuck out to me from the first data rescue in New York was that a majority of people came there because they said they wanted to bring their skills to contribute to something meaningful. And so that there was, what they saw data rescue as a way to respond to sort of like this concern they had about the ability to access this data. And through that, they got an opportunity to learn about this data. And so to me, that's like really been a great, like sort of like motivating moment to see. And I don't know, I'm kind of assuming that some of you have similar stories about like, like a surprising or like a really key point that you've noticed about what, like maybe what you see people gaining or contributing to this. Andrew?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think what you just said, Donna, and then what Brandon and Matt were saying are like really important, that this will be part of building a community and a movement that will learn, how to show data to everyone and not make this sort of just a little group of technocrats. I think in the short term, as we've seen, as you said, John, like there hasn't been a lot of data that's gone down, but I think what has actually been really important, in addition to already building up such a community that's interested, is actually between the archiving and then the monitoring work to actually like check what's gone down. There's already an enormous political cost to taking something down from the web, from the .gov domain right now. We've heard that from journalists. We've heard that directly from congressional staffers who we've spoken with, who have said like, yeah, people talk about the risk of an agency doing that right now. And moreover, in our website monitoring work, we've actually had journalists call up an agency after just like a paragraph was removed. In some cases, like an Obama era paragraph, in one case that wasn't really that important. And then that agency like, oh, that was a contractor who made that error. And then they put it up an hour later because they actually felt like there was a big concern that they would be written up in the news. So this work has been, in some sense, really like, I think part of why we haven't seen some little things removed. And I agree, like, I don't think that there was going to be this big purge. So it's not like I think we saved like all data, but I do think that this is the beginning of those steps. And integrating a community that cares, like y'all are saying, with a community that knows that they're sort of a big part of the resistance to actually these changes happening, I think that's what we're serving to do right now. Hopefully in the long term, we actually create all the things we want to and make data accessible as well. But in the short term, there are still values there's value that we're adding. I just wanted to add that.
So just in the interest of time, if maybe one or two more people have something who haven't spoken up, that'd be great. And otherwise, I kind of just have maybe one more prompt before we could start to think about proposals for how we actually do some of the stuff that we're all excited about doing. So yeah, if anyone hasn't chimed in so far, thinking about sort of like these efforts, please feel free either on the chat or here. And if not, maybe just one point that has come up a couple times in the chat is and previously in conversation around partnerships is, so like what voices are missing from this conversation, and are there people who are doing parallel work or doing this work exactly that we haven't spoke to that we should be, are the people we should be trying to include in this conversation or reach out to help push some of these conversations forward. And I think we've gotten a lot of great suggestions just recently from Patricia. I know Justin has also made a couple. And so I'm hearing a lot of like citizen science. I think a lot of people are speaking to like local groups in their city or region that they're also connecting to, which is great to sort of have it be local, but I'm wondering if at a national scale as well. Yeah, so civic tech groups, as someone who goes to the civic tech group here, and that's what got me into this, yes. Yeah, so are there any missing voices or people maybe we should really think about reaching out to?
Maybe some additional types of data. So we're emphasizing a lot of environmental data, but there's population data, population census data, which is also very politically charged. There's drug data, FDA, drug testing, etc. There's also, I mean, there's a bunch of things like that that I think we're not, that I haven't seen too much on the radar. A little bit through the primers that Toli and Maya and Andrew have been putting together. Some of the agencies have touched on that, but I think there's a whole slew of additional things that are at risk, which may not actually be getting a voice here or in other efforts because we're not touching those people or that data.
That's a really, really great point. And then Patricia also mentioned in the chat this sort of like maybe that we're not coordinating as much with groups who are doing the same thing, and so that's something we want to think about. Also, fence line communities, totally union concerned scientists. I want to maybe just give a couple more minutes if people have thoughts on this. I know one thing that's come up on our side, oh, sorry, I'll just finish this thought and then you can go, Andrew, is really making a concerted effort to reach out to the web archiving community and try and understand like, you know, what we can learn from existing efforts and sort of how the challenge that we have, there are some challenges that we're finding that I think are ones that web archiving has maybe not dealt with as much previously, and so what the opportunities are to work together around that. And then Andrew.
I just want to say, yeah, I think that like there's so many groups, you know, that work with fence line communities, and then there's groups of people in fence line communities that have, you know, created, you know, we shouldn't just think of people working in fence line communities out there. They themselves organize. I think what we probably need to do as a community here is try like a couple of just pilot sort of runs, either going out to communities, you know, sending actual people from our community out, or whatever it is. You know, the Union of Concerned Scientists, Public Lab, various other groups work with these communities, and I think it's like there's so many people that would love to like come get a demo and actually have their own data go into our pipeline, and then understand how to visualize it and understand how to ascribe metadata. So I think it's very hard to think of it as like, let's do this with all fence line communities. But if we just start thinking about a few that we know of, then maybe it'll be more tractable.
Awesome. Yeah. So just in the interest of time, we were kind of thinking at this point to shift into discussing a little bit the emerging opportunities that are happening right now, and then maybe identify some areas that we want to begin to work on to sort of move this stuff forward. I just kind of wanted to reflect a little bit on kind of the pain points and the needs that have been identified in this call, and then also some of the other themes that were brought up before and just now. So I'm actually, from what I'm hearing, there are a lot of needs around sort of improving aspects of the event workflow. It seems like there's something around onboarding that we should really be thinking about here. I'm also hearing, sorry, I've been taking notes and then pushing over, so I'm going to do some like side looking. I think I'm also hearing some stuff about understanding what our shared goals are and sort of like what shared goals could be with partners. Thinking about ways that across events there could be some communication or sharing. I heard, I know Sarah mentioned her like the module that got developed there. So there's like things that are happening at these local events that could be of interest and value for other people, and figuring out a way that can be clearly communicated. And then I'm also hearing sort of this issue of like broadening who feels like they could belong in this community. So there's some sense in which there's a little bit of like a technical potential, like people seeing it as a technical activity, but it doesn't have to be that, and it hasn't been that. And then I guess the other big thing I've seen or heard was this other types of data. So thinking about broadening, not just people who say they could be involved, but broadening the types of data, or making people aware that this doesn't just as a model maybe apply to environmental data. And I guess, so moving more into proposals for what to do next, two emerging opportunities that are already ongoing. One, the Libraries Plus network from DataRescue, and then sort of an iteration on the web archiving process are kind of currently on the go. And so we were hoping to maybe speak a little bit about that, and then sort of see the additional areas that we want to identify. So the additional concerns that aren't met by maybe those proposals, if they've come out in this call, and then what we can do to address those. So Margaret, are you able to speak to the Libraries Plus network now? Oh, great. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm in the middle of giving something. Yes, the Libraries Plus network kind of fits into, it kind of addresses a lot of the issues that a lot of people have been bringing up. So what we've been thinking about really since the beginning of these events, where, as I said, DataRescue is in part, like half of this effort is coming from the libraries. So we're thinking about it a lot from that perspective, and we've always felt that this backing up data, backing up federal information, making it accessible has always been the work of libraries. It's what we do. And the Libraries Plus network is kind of envisioning a reboot of the Federal Depository Library Program, which, if you're not familiar with that, the idea was back when more things were printed, they were sent out to these federal depository libraries so that there would be copies of them distributed across the country to improve access. But now, as we all know very well, most government information is born digital. And that stuff is not going to libraries. We've all just sort of been letting it sit on these federal servers. Some of it's backed up, but not all of it. And it's not backed up in any sort of systematic way. So we're working with libraries, the open data community, the open government community, people within government agencies, all kinds of stakeholders. So we've been talking to sort of think about this problem and really identify what the different what the smaller problems within that giant problem are. So that we can start thinking about a way to systematically and sustainably keep this data backed up. So that's the Libraries Plus network in a nutshell.
And can you kind of speak to, sorry, I said I had this as a note to prompt and I failed. I was going to ask both you and Brendan to speak to sort of like immediate next steps, or like where people should go to find out more information and ways to be involved.
Yeah, so the Libraries Plus network is the big thing that we have coming up is this meeting that we have in May with many of these stakeholders that I just mentioned. That meeting has a cap on attendance and it's invite only. So that's already happening. We're trying to be as open as possible. You can go to libraries.network to get more information about what we're up to. We try to keep the blog up to date. We are doing, because this May meeting is becoming a pretty big deal, and we know a lot of people want to be there who can't be there, we are doing a number of different webinars to keep people updated. And we also, and then we're speaking about it at many different places. And that's now, all those speaking engagements and webinars are now on the website. If you want to check out how you can hear more. I can't type and talk at the same time, but I'll put it in the chat.
Awesome. And so I given the time we have left, was hoping we could do both proposals and then have a little bit of a conversation about that. And if there's any specific questions, we could have them in the chat, and then see kind of other concerns that we want to be immediately addressing. So Brendan, are you able to speak a little bit now to the iterating on web archiving? And I know it's kind of been hinted at or mentioned previously in the call.
Totally, yeah. And if you guys don't mind, I'd love to just demo like a really quick thing that hopefully speaks to some of what we're sort of been up to. Since we started working on, basically since we left the spreadsheet territory and built an app, we like immediately recognized a whole bunch of things that could be improved. I think a lot of it was covered in this call today, actually far more clearly than it has been sort of iterated before. It's amazing how much having an event organizer sort of tell you just face to face what could be improved on is just invaluable. And so the biggest things that we were sort of noticing was the technical hurdles are pretty high in the current app. We're sort of missing an opportunity in online participation, and really trying to drive a more simple ask from volunteers so that it's a sort of more direct, in a nutshell, like here's the thing that you can do right now that would help us greatly. And while obviously there will always be sort of a number of things that we're doing, hopefully we can sort of get everybody in the door on some of that stuff. So with that, we've been working on a proposal that I'll just do a really quick demo of like what some of this workflow could look like in the future. All of this is just a proposal, and our big ask for this, we're sort of working title is just Archivers 2.0. The big ask is we're really looking for feedback on this. We'd really like to develop this into something that the community finds deeply useful. So yeah, with that, I'll share my screen quickly here. Hopefully this works. Share screen. Cool. Can everybody see that? Oh, you can talk because you're all muted. I hope everybody can see this. So the way this would work sort of in the future is we've sort of changed a couple of things away from, this is sort of in addition to, a lot of what I'll show you is in addition to our current workflow, and has everything to do with attributing metadata to individual URLs. And so volunteers would show up at a much more simple, like, hey, we need you to archive some data. And then we take you to this kind of screen, which is much more sort of like, these are little progress bars of like where we are on individual, I'm calling these sources, which are just the individual URLs from primers. So if we look at the actual primers list, we now have ingested the actual primers that everybody has been putting this incredible amount of work into building, and we can actually sort of grab the information, somebody can get acquainted with a resource and sort of understand, okay, this HAPS website needs data. And so getting back to a piece of content that needs metadata, this is in the background. Oh yes, and so it's worth noting that we're now sort of automating a lot of this process so that people don't actually download and upload things as much. And instead what we're asking them to do is sort of participate in describing and qualifying and contextualizing this information. And so if we click through to information here, we've got a piece of content. We don't know anything about what it is. A volunteer would hit download. They would look at the file that they're seeing, and then they'd actually have URLs that link to this, to the point of from the Chicago chapter, where this version like crawls specific URLs, and you can see sort of snapshots of a URL and how it works. But then once we add metadata, we get a much more sort of, this looks a little complicated, but this is actually derived directly from the data.gov spec that, as was mentioned earlier, is a very good, we think is a great spec that's been developed by the United States government. This interoperates with CCAN instances, with what else? With Dataverse instances. It works in a lot of different areas. And so it's been agreed that this sort of format would be a great starting point. And we've been in talks with some other projects that are also engaged in archiving, and they feel like this, if we had this coverage of every file, we'd be really excited to sort of see that. So an individual user can come in and submit metadata all they like. They can fill this out. Most importantly, once I do fill it out, it's actually attributed to me as a person, so I can actually see the metadata that I've added. And so hopefully in the future, we could use this to build a better reward system for when people actually write in and take the time to volunteer. So if you came to somebody's sort of personal page and you saw this list of achievements and accolades for the metadata they've attributed, we could hopefully, I think that'd be a good thing. But yeah, and so behind the scenes, we have, that's kind of it for the demo. Oh yeah, I should show like just very quickly, like we're actually working across like URLs. So we can actually search for like EPA and we get like the actual website. We're crawling across the actual, and we're sort of traversing the actual pages, so we can go from a page and we can actually see links to and from it. Currently, this one has no links, so that was an awful example. But anyways, so everything that we, or how do I stop this share? Oh, here we go. Yes, so that's just a quick demo, but basically the hope is to sort of really help make it so that somebody can show up online and just start contributing this metadata to a place that we could sort of start to coordinate with other services, because we're now working across content as well as URLs. And we could use this as sort of a starting point and then distribute to as many potential partners as possible. And the hope is to sort of really up the value of a contribution that a volunteer makes by having it go to as many places as possible. And also try to reduce the technical overhead that is needed for a user to sort of get to contribution. And the hope with that is we would sort of automate a lot of this with web crawlers. And then we have a whole area, we'd be building a whole new area for very technically motivated users to write scripts and submit scripts instead of actual downloads and uploads that we could then rerun in the future, which we would think would be a much more robust method of archiving hard to reach data. And all this is to say we could then use that to distribute to lots of different places, which we think would be a really great source of authority. So like by pushing to Data Refuge, when a bag hits Data Refuge, you have a much sort of like higher degree of rigor, as Margaret mentioned, like having the libraries and anybody who is sort of a data repository verify and be able to grab this data. And they would be able to individually see contributions based on users and sort of factor out any content that they thought wasn't valid or wasn't contributed by a trustworthy source. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're hoping to head. We've been building an API. We've been building a whole number of services to try and spec this out as a proposal. The big hope is that obviously this is sort of like a lot of new thinking, and we would really like to start to understand this as a community and really get sort of feedback going. Yeah. Anyways.
So one thing you didn't talk about was maybe slightly more technical, but I think touches on some of the stuff that Justin, and to some extent, but mostly Justin was talking about verification. So the use of cryptographic keys as a way to associate any work with an individual eases, I think, is meant to be a technical intervention that reduces the overhead for the provenance work in part.
Yes.
And it would also allow, for instance, something that entered like the whole huge system, not through us, but through Climate Mirror, to be kind of, to enter the process kind of late and be signed by, some trusted individual, say at Penn, say a trusted librarian at Penn signs some large piece of data, signs and describes some large piece of data that was downloaded by Climate Mirror, then its authority is no less kind of real than something that went through the process solely through us. So to me, that's an exciting thing that's sort of flexible, but also rigorous at the same time.
Yeah, and to that point, we can start to really, just to add to what Matt was saying, this opens up some possibilities for us. We could do Mechanical Turk style triple check requirements, where you can say, look, we need to have 3 people review this before it's even considered remotely finished. We also have, by switching to, you were seeing a lot of really crazy long strings of letters and numbers in that demo. Those are called hashes, which are digital fingerprints of the content itself. And so that's what, as Matt was mentioning, what lets us do a lot of our deduplication work, and also allows us to verify from a computational level that we're all talking about the same data. On top of that, it opens up the doors to distributing copies of this data all around the world. And so we can keep duplicates all over the place, associate metadata with these long strings of letters and numbers, and that helps us sort of like couple things together later on and really know that we're all talking about the same thing. And so a lot of this has sort of been based on a ton of feedback that we've been getting in talking with people who have been running events. I think the real hope of like being able to have a really solid online contribution arm of this is where we're hoping to go. And yeah, so hopefully that helps. I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Yeah, just in the interest of time, those questions might be something to sort of push to like maybe having in a Slack channel after or ongoing, but just maybe to understand too, I saw you answer to Patricia that like you're maybe looking for people to test it. I know that you're kind of like the coming month is going to be a big month for sort of like understanding whether this system is connecting to all the needs that are coming out of sort of existing pain points that are identified around using the archiver's current app. So could you maybe speak just very briefly to like maybe how people could become involved in that?
Yes, I'll drop a link to a GitHub repo of our proposed services, and we would love if people could read through that if they have the time. And if not, that issues queue is where we're really hoping to sort of centralize some of the feedback around it. And yeah, is that good, Dawn?
Yeah, I think that's good. So coming out of both of those like opportunities, and I am kind of wondering if we maybe want to just check in and see how that fits to the proposals or thoughts that people have had just earlier, and maybe if there's additional work that we want to identify here as like striking out as doing to kind of meet those identified needs. Matt, I think you have a point.
Well, I think so. I think one point that's worth that John's point also raises is John's point from earlier that I responded to is whether data rescue is the most useful rubric for the work that we are trying to do moving forward. If we think that what we're doing is rebuilding the infrastructure for data, I'm not sure that's the same thing as rescuing data. And so there's a kind of maybe a broadening of the scope that isn't captured by that name. I don't know if people feel that I'm right about that.
My thought on that is that data rescue doesn't have to be limited in scope to just what's happening with the Archivers app and the primers. We've really been open to calling it a lot of things. A lot of events have done a lot of different kinds of workflows, or haven't done any archiving, have just stuck to educational activities, or have focused on other areas. So I think it's not about saying like, oh, data rescue is over. It's more about we need to redefine what it is.
Okay, so that's maybe a thing that's is a big point that we want to speak to, is maybe understanding or redefining what data rescue or like what events are going to be, because there are going to be future events. So that to me seems like a big area where there is sort of maybe more work to be done. I know coming out of today, we've heard a lot about sort of like some of the learning opportunities, sort of the not only archiving, but maybe how people get to interact with data, thinking about storytelling, and a lot of this other sort of other efforts that people see being complementary to what's already happening. So to me, that seems like an area that we don't have something like right now about. So we maybe want to think more about how we can sort of think through that and what the right structure would be. One thing that I'm going to just pull forward from before that's also come up is partnerships. So I think maybe thinking a little bit strategically about what those partnerships could be, sort of thinking about, oh, sorry, I've just like lost my, I lost my train of thought because I looked at the chat. But also like connecting those to the themes that kind of have come up out of events. I think that there's more work there to think about like what a strategy around some of those partnerships could be. And that's not maybe something that we can answer in like one day, but we want to maybe spend some time thinking through. I mean, also in addition, just I think there is, I think we're hearing and in throughout organizer feedback, there are some needs about some of the current stuff that we have. So there has to be some, I think, level of, working with that feedback to address some of the needs that organizers are giving us. And I've been keeping those notes throughout here, and they're in the notes from today's chat, but I wanted to sort of see if people think those make sense. Are there additional concerns that aren't being addressed? Is there sort of stuff that we've missed that we should be thinking about?
Could I just say something on the topic of sort of, we're saying we don't need to necessarily just do data rescue. We don't need to just do archiving. We can do, and then there's the other side, which is the events can be about education. I think there's probably an intermediate where we can still have something like a pipeline, but the pipeline is has visualization tools, and it has, it focuses on data metadata description. It's still something like a pipeline where everyone feels like they're contributing to this overall cause, but it's not just to archive data. And it is actually in and of itself sort of an educational piece. I'm saying that because I think concretely we could envision a future archivers app, but it's not called the iCarves app, it's just called like the data app or like the community data app, whatever, that both has an archiving component, but maybe once we're done archiving or we don't value it anymore because we feel like it's sort of saturated, it also does these other things. But it really is still a concrete app, because I guess my worry is that I do want to work towards something concrete that allows community building to continue happening in the same way that this app has sort of facilitated it, but it doesn't just focus on the technical archiving aspect.
I think that's a great point, especially in relating that data to people. I mean, if we do our jobs properly, we're going to have all of this data, all of this climate data all in one place, essentially, so we can leverage that data to create even more comprehensive maps of like sea level rise, or like have that all that data in one place that's very visual, very relatable.
Okay, so just also thinking about time, and like, a 2-hour call does not solve everything. I'm kind of hearing, just to kind of circle back around, that maybe we want to, this is the model I got. I feel like maybe a working group. So like, I think we want to like connect to sort of having some people who want to think about the partnership strategy side, have some people speak to kind of, I guess, the vision goals, like vision goals, to use Mike's vision goals, whatever, but like it's community building aspect. And then also, yeah, and so that's a good point. So like, how do we do this as a way for people to maybe scaffold their own stuff out of it instead of being prescriptive, for sure. And then also, I think maybe a way that we could, at events, address some of this existing feedback that we've received. So I'm wondering if that kind of sounds good to each other, to people here. Like, so maybe we want to have a couple groups that in the coming weeks will kind of investigate this stuff, and we could aim to have keep going with our weekly community building calls, but have those more be almost like working group check-in calls on these 3 areas, and then come back and have like a town hall again, but maybe like a shorter one, just as like we've had some people go and sort of like investigate and try and maybe propose like a community document that answers like, what could be the vision and goals for this kind of work, and then like maybe a document about here's a strategy for some of these new partnerships, identifying people, and then also have been doing some of the ongoing improvement to event plans. Does that? I'm seeing nods. I think it would be really good to just do a bit of a check-in, and we can just do it by chat, and we can put a thing in the channels after, so you don't have to commit today, but could maybe we check in and say who's interested in what. So are there people interested in kind of that community building vision goals work, and kind of exploring what that looks like here? And if so, maybe you could add like a +1 or your name, or say I'm interested in the chat, or put your hands up or something. So I'm seeing a few. Okay, cool. And then and this could be something that we'll reach out to you after and connect on. I'm wondering if there are people who are interested in more of the partnership, thinking about communities that are missing, strategic opportunities and ways that you could connect to current groups, and how that those efforts that are already similar to the stuff that's been going on at these events. I'm seeing some hands. Cool. We have interest. And then maybe the last sort of area also being the events, like sort of addressing the needs that have come out of this call in the last couple of weeks of community building, and us sort of really doing like a deep dig back through a lot of the feedback we've received. And so maybe like I don't know what to call that. I'll call it future of events. So we'll have that maybe as a call. Are there people who are interested in that? Yeah, so it's a good point. Maybe Maya, could you drop some names? My names are terrible in the chat. And Justin's asking or saying interested in all the things. Like, I don't really see these being super separate from each other. So I'm going to propose as a working model that we keep doing the community building calls on Thursdays, but really maybe frame them around just a check-in on each of those 3 areas. Like, that's what the call is for. Of course, anyone can join, open at any point. But then we aim to sort of over the arc of a month kind of like work to develop like a stronger sense of each of those. So maybe like have a deliverable, and we can sort of spend the next few days identifying what that deliverable should be for each. And then if you're interested in a couple, I mean, I don't see there being a reason why you couldn't be involved in all of them, but I mean, really just being mindful of like volunteer time and keeping this sustainable, it might be great to, so plus a Slack channel for each working group, that'd be awesome. But it might be great to just sort of not commit to all of them, but then aim to be a part of one, and then through those community building conversations every week, get a way to check in and offer feedback and sort of like help push all of this forward. I'm seeing nods. I'm wondering how people feel about that. I'm seeing thumbs up. I'm seeing multiple thumbs up. I will take them. Whew. I got my thumbs too. Great. Okay. Do we want to maybe have a couple? Is there any parting thoughts that people have? Just maybe open the conversation now. Thank you all for going on this 2-hour call with me and each other. But yeah, is there? So I'll be maybe pinging some of you, all of you, I'll be pinging you just as a reminder about this. And so you don't have to commit to the working group today, but in just the next couple of days, think about if there's an area you want to be involved with. I mean, you came to a call like this, so I feel like you have lots of ideas. They were amazing, and that could speak to each of those areas. And I think it would be wonderful to have you kind of like help kind of set some of those directions as we kind of try and unpack and understand what this could be. Okay, then I will be also saying goodbye and like letting you all go roughly on time. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you all in Slack, and we'll be pinging just with a reminder about the groups. And then for those interested, we'll have like a short call on Thursday.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dawn.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks everyone for coming. This is awesome. It's always so exciting to hear from organizers.
Yes. You're all
Lovely
amazing.
talking to you guys. Have a great Saturday evening.
Bye.
Bye.